On September the 15th, 2023, police were called to perform a welfare check on an elderly couple who hadn't been seen in over 4 years. But what they discovered when they arrived at the couple's home was beyond anyone's worst nightmare.
My dad's body's in there.
Right, okay.
Yep, okay. Obviously I'll
What about your mum?
a little bit more complicated.
Okay.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Decoder. I'm Olivia.
And I'm Paula.
Today's case takes us into a world of lies, betrayal and manipulation. It's the chilling story of Virginia McCullough, a woman who, despite seemingly having everything, her own space, freedom and a family that trusted her, was hiding a dark truth.
She convinced her parents she was working, going to school and taking care of them out of love, but behind the scenes, she was spiraling deeper into greed.
Her lies would ultimately lead her to take the most extreme action.
This is The Decoder, and today we uncover the shocking truth behind the murder of John and Lois McCullough by their own daughter. You won't believe the lengths that Virginia went to and the darkness that drove her.
This one's a heavy one, so buckle up.
Let's first start by talking about her parents, John and Lois McCullough.
They were born in the early 1940s, and while we don't know all the details of their early lives, we do know they were pretty well respected in their community. John, for example, was a lecturer at Anglia Ruskin University and even had a few books published. But as he got older, his health really started to decline. Type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, glaucoma, the whole 9 yards. And eventually, it pushed him into retirement.
Now, John wasn't exactly the type to spend his retirement just sitting at home. He kept himself busy, filling his day with golf and snooker and spending time with his friends. But more than anyone, his wife, Lois, who was his closest companion, his ride or die. The two of them spent a lot of time together, especially visiting seasides, which was their little escape.
Lois, on the other hand, was a stay-at-home mum and housewife, but she had her own interests. One of her favourite hobbies was writing letters as part of a pen pal programme. She was also fascinated by history and the royal family, which were her go-to topics of interest.
The McCulloughs lived in a village of Badau and raised 5 daughters. Virginia, being the youngest out of all, was born in the late 1980s.
To the outside world, she had what seemed like a normal upbringing, and for the most part, the family appeared to be fairly average. Their daughters even described their parents as old-fashioned. They cared for them, but weren't exactly big on showing affection.
But the truth was much darker.
Both John and Lois were reportedly abusive. In court, it came out that Lois used to punish one of the children for wetting the bed. Social services even got involved after neighbours reported hearing Lois screaming at her kids. People who knew the family confirmed rumours of mistreatment, and Virginia herself later described some of what she had endured. She said her mother would hit her with a stick in the shower, a punishment that went on until she was 13. She described Lois as angry and violent and even called her a happiness hoover.
Despite all this, John and Lois were still described in the court as loving parents.
Now, looking back at this family dynamic, it's easy to see how it could have shaped someone like Virginia. Not just in the things she did, but in the person she became. Growing up in such a strict, emotionally charged household clearly left its mark. Virginia's sisters called her a habitual liar, someone they could never trust.
But the family dynamic was just as revealing.
Despite Lois and John being gone for 4 years, none of their children ever showed too much concern about that. Think about that. It really highlights how distant and disconnected they were as a family. It's not just about the rules of strictness, it's about how emotionally detached they seem to be from one another.
Let's fast forward to 2019. By this point, all of the McCullough children had moved out, building lives of their own. All except Virginia. At 32 years old, she was still living at home, rent-free, and going nowhere.
Now, here's where things get even more complicated. Over the years, Virginia told her parents she'd been diagnosed with various health conditions, even claiming to have had cancer scares, and because of this, they allowed her to stay at home. But none of it was true. Virginia wasn't sick at all.
But that wasn't the only lie she told her parents.
Nope. She also claimed to have a job, whereas in reality, her last job had been a short stint at a bar back in 2017. But she convinced her parents she was working as a web designer. Every day, she would leave the house pretending to go to work only to wander the city until her shift was over. And if that wasn't enough, she even told them she was taking courses online to become an artist, claiming it was a career path that would eventually benefit the whole family financially. Now, up until this point, Virginia's parents trusted her completely. They believed her when she said all of her expenses were being covered by the money she was earning from her job. But as we now know, that wasn't the case.
So how was she actually managing her personal expenses?
Well, she wasn't really living at her parents' house for free. While they didn't charge her rent, Virginia took on the role of their caregiver in exchange. As John's health was worsening day by day, her presence gave both of her parents much needed support. This arrangement also convinced them that she genuinely cared for and loved them, and that trust eventually led them to hand over control of their financial affairs to her.
Virginia's responsibilities were mainly technology-based, with a focus on online banking.
And once she gained access to her parents' accounts, she discovered they had tens of thousands of pounds saved up. This was the money that they had worked hard for all their lives and built it through their pensions and savings.
And seeing this, Virginia felt like she won the lottery. And that's when her reckless spending spree began.
Virginia had a very bad gambling addiction and she lost hundreds and thousands of pounds each month. And since she had no money of her own, she began siphoning large sums from her parents' accounts. But there was a problem. Her parents would notice if too much money disappeared too quickly. So to cover her tracks, Virginia took out loans and credit cards in their names.
And this strategy allowed her to keep most of the savings intact, at least for a while.
When Virginia could no longer get approved for more credit cards or loans, she turned back to her parents' savings, withdrawing money directly from their accounts. Of course, John noticed the missing funds and confronted her about it, but instead of coming clean, Virginia blamed it on fraud, banking errors, and hacking.
She kept on reassuring her parents that she was in constant contact with the banks, and the money would eventually be refunded. Naturally, no refunds ever came because she was the one spending every penny.
By the time this scam ran its course, Virginia had stolen around £60,000 from her parents. To keep them from catching on completely, she stuck to her story, insisting the banks were just taking longer than expected to return the money. And it seemed like her parents believed her, or at least wanted to believe her. Lois even wrote to a pen pal about a scam they'd fallen into, which shows how distressed they were. But Virginia? She didn't seem to care at all.
This went on for some time, but by 2019, John and Lois became more vocal about their concerns over the missing money. And that's when things took a dark turn.
Their suspicions made Virginia increasingly anxious. She was terrified they'd uncover the full extent of her lies and report her to the police. But more than that, she feared losing her access to their money. Without it, she'd be forced to stand on her own, give up her gambling habit, and stop her shopping sprees. For her, that was unthinkable.
So in March of that year, overwhelmed by debt and out of options, Virginia made a chilling decision.
She decided to murder her parents. Not out of desperation, but as a calculated way to secure what was left of their money, thousands of pounds that she still saw as hers for the taking.
In May 2019, Virginia made the decision to set her horrifying plan into motion.
She had devised not one but two ways to end her parents' lives. Plan A involved overdosing them with prescription medication. She went online, purchased a large amount of pills, and even bought tools to crush them into powder. Her intention was to secretly mix the medication into their drinks so they wouldn't wake up.
But she wasn't leaving anything to chance.
No, Virginia also came up with a plan B. If the poisoning didn't work, she had a kitchen knife ready. And to make sure she had a backup to the backup, she bought a hammer, just in case she needed another way to carry out her plan. 2 days before the murders, Virginia tested her plan on her father. She spiked his drink, but only with a small dose, not enough to kill him, just enough to see how it worked.
Then, on the evening of Monday, June 17th, 2019, she decided it was time to follow through.
That night, she drugged her parents' alcoholic drinks before they went to bed. Tragically, her father John didn't survive. He passed away in his sleep. But her mother, Lois, was still alive the next morning. Maybe the dose wasn't strong enough, or perhaps Lois hadn't consumed all of the drink. Whatever the reason, Virginia's plan hadn't fully worked.
The following morning, June 19th, Lois was sitting on her bed, likely unaware of what had happened. She thought John was still asleep, but in reality, he was gone. Later, during a police interview, Virginia recalled the moment, saying, "She looked so innocent, just sitting there listening to the radio."
At this point, Virginia turned to her backup plan. She picked up the hammer she'd bought and walked into her mother's room, but she couldn't bring herself to do it immediately. Virginia went in and out of the room 3 times, trying to gather enough courage.
She knew that if she hesitated too long, her mother might realize what had happened, and everything would fall apart.
Eventually, Virginia forced herself to act. She attacked Lois with the hammer, but it was taking longer than she expected, so she turned to the knife, stabbing her mother repeatedly. Virginia later claimed that she didn't want Lois to suffer, as though that somehow justified her actions.
In total, Lois was stabbed 7 times. As she was being attacked, she looked at her daughter in disbelief, asking, "Why are you doing this?"
It's hard to imagine what Lois must have felt when her life was taken by her own daughter. As a mother, she had given Virginia everything, her life, a home, when she had no place to go, her trust and control over their family's finances. Lois likely believed she was helping her daughter get back on her feet, never suspecting that trust would be betrayed in such a devastating way.
For Virginia, it seems greed took over. She wasn't just stealing money anymore. She took her parents' lives to keep her secret hidden and to fuel her spending. It's chilling to think how far she was willing to go, crossing the line to get what she wanted.
After killing her mother, Virginia held her hand, crying and apologizing over and over. For a moment, it almost seemed like she felt some kind of regret for what she had done. But that regret didn't last long.
During the attack, Virginia had accidentally cut her hand with a knife. She needed to get it treated, so she made an appointment with a doctor. When the doctor asked her about the cut, she lied, saying she'd cut herself while chopping vegetables in the kitchen. The story worked, and she got the treatment she needed without anyone suspecting a thing.
Not long after, Virginia went shopping at the Cheswood Town Centre. Using her parents' money, she bought supplies to cover up what she had done. 2 sleeping bags, duct tape, and plastic sheeting. But instead of hurrying to hide the bodies, Virginia didn't seem too concerned.
She left her parents' remains where they were overnight and went about her day like nothing had happened. In fact, she took the time to shop online, treating herself to some new clothes and jewelry with their money.
When she finally got around to dealing with the bodies, Virginia wrapped each of her parents in plastic sheeting, taped them up, and put them into sleeping bags. Then she sealed the bags with more tape. But here's the thing, she didn't get rid of them. Instead, she kept their bodies in the house and continued living there as if nothing had changed. John's body was placed in what Virginia described as a tomb. She built herself using masonry blocks and blankets. And as for Lois's body, it was stuffed into a wardrobe.
And just like that, Virginia lived with her parents' bodies in the house for 4 years. It's a chilling thought. But the question remains, how did she manage to get away with it for so long?
Well, the COVID-19 pandemic played a huge role in helping Virginia keep her secret. But that came months after her parents' deaths. In the meantime, Virginia went to incredible lengths to make it seem like everything was normal. On the same afternoon she murdered her parents, Virginia used her mother's phone to send text messages to her sisters, pretending to be Lois. She didn't stop there. Over the following weeks, she sent cards, gifts, and more messages to friends and family. At one point, she even impersonated her mother on a phone call with one of her sisters.
But as time went on, people started to notice her parents' absence. So Virginia came up with a story. She told everyone that Lois and John were off traveling to the seaside towns in their final days. And surprisingly, it worked. Most people bought it.
Then came the pandemic. Lockdowns in the UK meant people were staying home, avoiding in-person visits, and relying on phone calls for communication. For Virginia, this was the perfect cover. She used the lockdown as an opportunity to deepen her deception.
Virginia didn't stop at just telling stories. She actually started impersonating Lois during calls to doctors. Over time, she had made 185 calls, talking about fake medical issues as if she were Lois herself. It was a cold, calculated move to keep anyone from asking questions.
But even with all that, paranoia began to set in. Virginia couldn't shake the fear of being found out. To calm her nerves, she called the Essex police 238 times. Each call was about something trivial, but to her, it was a way of making sure the police weren't looking into her. And for a while, those calls gave her a sense of relief, like she was in the clear.
But her paranoia didn't stop there.
Just days before her arrest, Virginia called the police again, this time with a bizarre story. She reported being assaulted by 3 intruders who, she said, had broken into her home. Of course, this wasn't true. The injuries she showed officers, slash marks, were self-inflicted. What makes this even more disturbing is that the officers actually showed up to investigate. They sat in her living room talking to her, completely unaware that her parents' bodies were still hidden inside the house.
But why couldn't Virginia just keep her head down? That's the real question. And it says so much about her state of mind. People who commit crimes like this often operate on 2 extremes. Either they try to disappear completely, or they overcompensate to maintain a sense of control. Virginia seemed to fall into the second category. But why?
Well, it's possible that Virginia wasn't just paranoid. She was actively looking for validation that she was still in control. By constantly calling the police, pretending to be her parents, and even creating scenarios like the fabricated assault, she may have been testing the boundaries of her deception. It's almost as if she needed proof that her lies were still holding up.
But I feel like there is something deeper here.
Yeah, because people who commit crimes of this magnitude often struggle to live with the silence afterwards. The weight of what they've done can manifest in strange ways, sometimes as overconfidence, sometimes as self-sabotage. Virginia's constant need to insert herself into situations, even when it risked exposing her, suggests she couldn't fully manage the guilt or fear bubbling beneath the surface.
Virginia was often described as odd and socially awkward. In 2022, she began wearing maternity dresses. And by 2023, neighbors started noticing what looked like a pregnancy bump. But soon enough, it came out that Virginia wasn't actually pregnant. She wasn't even dating anyone. She'd been faking the whole thing.
But that wasn't the only strange thing about her. Neighbors said she would leave little gifts at their doorsteps, almost as if she was trying to buy their friendship. One neighbor, Phil Sargent, shared that Virginia would drop off food at his door every single day, even though he'd told her multiple times that he wasn't hungry and didn't need the food. She just kept leaving it.
Then, in September 2023, as the lockdowns were easing, things started to go back to normal. It was around this time that John and Lois's doctor began to get worried.
They hadn't seen John in over 4 years despite his serious health problems. He had been offered multiple appointments, but he never showed up, and Virginia had been cancelling all of them. To make matters worse, John hadn't picked up his critical medication in months. The doctor raised concerns and contacted the police for a welfare check to make sure everything was okay. When officers arrived, Virginia told them her parents were away on holiday and wouldn't be back until October. The officers asked if there was any way they could get in touch with her parents, but Virginia said no, so they left.
But something about Virginia's response didn't sit right with the officers.
They couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. So they passed the case on to detectives. They launched a full-blown missing persons investigation. The detectives worked relentlessly, following every lead. They reached out to relatives, friends, and anyone who might have seen the couple in the last few years. They even traced the couple's credit card transactions, and it all led back to Virginia.
That's when the missing persons case turned into a murder investigation. The police obtained a search warrant for the property, and what they discovered inside was beyond shocking and deeply disturbing.
It's fine. No one in here at the moment. Hold on. The police. Got it.
Stay where you are.
Stay where you are.
Show me
Stay where you are. Show your hands. You here?
Jenny.
Yep.
Jenny. Oh. The time is 12:12. You're under arrest on suspicion of murder against Jonathan McCulloch and Lars McCulloch. Okay? You don't say anything, but it may harm defence. You do not mention when questioned, so much like to report anything you do so to the evidence. Okay? Alright, your arrest is necessary for a prompt and effective.
Is there anything in the pot that we should know about?
Yes, there
Where?
is. Can I take you to it?
No, you can tell me.
Can we go in there for a second, just so I can tell you something about what's in there?
Yeah.
And then,
You need to tell us
the only
something
reason
about
I
what's in
said I need to tell you something about what's upstairs on the top floor as well.
It's fine.
Yeah, okay.
My dad's body's in there.
Right, okay.
Yep, okay. Obviously I'll
Where about
say,
your mum?
a little bit more complicated. That's why I said, can I go upstairs and show you?
Right, can you explain it to us, please? Because we're trying to preserve this. It's now going to be seen, so we need to preserve this the best we can. So I don't want you to have you walking up there, all right? Good.
Okay, so upstairs there are about 5 wardrobes.
Yep.
It's behind the bed, at the back, next to the sink. That's the second one. I slipped 5 of those into his drink. There were about 2 or 3 drinks that I brought downstairs. And yeah, they were basically, he didn't drink all of them. He only drank probably about half of 2. But yeah, when I went in the morning, this was before my mother. When I went in the morning, early hours, I got up about half an hour early, about 6 o'clock in the morning. Came in and he was gone. He was gone.
Okay.
It was.
It's up to you if you want to talk.
Yeah.
But the thing is, purpose of your arrest. Purpose of your arrest is for a prompt, effective investigation, as well as by questioning you. We can't do that here. It needs to be done at a police station, all right?
I did know that this would kind of come eventually. It's proper that I serve my punishment. So, yeah. Cheer up, at least you caught the bad guy. Also in the handbag as well, there's, and again, because you're probably going to need to know about it, there's a card in there, card one money. And that's a bank card where there's a lot of transactions that have taken place over the last few years from money that pertains to my parents. So, murder weapon is upstairs in the toilet room, kitchen knife. It's in the middle of the brown carpet. against the wall, opposite the shelves. So next bit is very hard to talk about. That's probably the most grisly detail. So on the ground floor, underneath the stairs, there's a few like storage boxes and things. And in the middle, I think it's in one of the boxes or in a bag or something. If you want me to shush after this, it's fine. But every bit helps. You will find forensic clips helpful. There's a hammer. I know, but I'm trying to help so you find everything. It's in the middle, underneath the stairs. It will still have blood on it. It's rusted, but it will still have blood traces on it.
Virginia acted extremely calm and composed and was very cooperative with the officers. Perhaps because, as she claimed, she had already anticipated her arrest. But no matter how prepared you are, recounting all the details of such an act is undeniably difficult. For most people, revisiting those events would stir up overwhelming emotions, guilt, fear, or even shame.
Yet, for Virginia, it seemed different. She didn't show any signs of remorse or struggle. She recounted the details with a chilling detachment, as if she were simply retelling the story that had nothing to do with her. It wasn't just her calmness that stood out. It was her complete lack of emotional connection to the horrifying acts she had committed.
Lois and John McCullough's remains were recovered from the scene and sent for autopsies. On September 17, 2023, Virginia was arrested and charged with the murders of her parents. She pleaded guilty to the charges, but in an attempt to sway the judge, she tried to play the victim, claiming her childhood experiences were to blame for her actions. However, the judge wasn't convinced. He made it clear that whatever happened in her childhood did not excuse or explain the actions she took in her 30s.
Just 2 weeks after her arrest, Virginia McCullough was sentenced to life in prison, with the minimum term set at 36 years.
Virginia McCullough murdered her parents in cold blood. Her actions were considered meticulous and carried out in such a way as to conceal what she had done for as long as possible. These were the actions of someone who had taken time to plan and carry out the murder of her parents in the interests of self-preservation and personal gain, before living within metres of the bodies of her two victims for a number of years. Throughout the course of our investigation, we have built a picture of the vast levels of deceit, betrayal and fraud that she was engaged in. It was on a shocking and monumental scale. McCullough lied about almost every aspect of her life, maintaining a charade to deceive everyone close to her and clearly taking advantage of her parents' goodwill. She is an intelligent manipulator who chose to kill her parents callously without a thought for them or those who continue to suffer as a result of their loss. The details of this case shock and horrify even the most experienced of murder detectives, let alone members of the public. It therefore follows that the wider family of John and Lois understandably could never have guessed or anticipated that McCullough would be capable of undertaking these murders before committing herself to this level of deceit. They have been left utterly devastated by the circumstances of this case, and they continue to feel the loss of John and Lois each and every day. This process, from the finding of John and Lois's remains to the unravelling of McCullough's web of lies, has taken a huge toll on the wider family network. With this sentence, and with all that we have uncovered throughout our investigation, we hope they can now start to find a way forward with their lives. The family have continued to struggle with the intense media interest in this case, and I would repeat in the strongest possible terms their wish for their privacy to be respected as they continue to grieve their loss. Thank you.
This case is such a chilling example of how trauma and dysfunction in family can fester and manifest in unimaginable ways, but it raises so many questions, like how much of Virginia's actions can be attributed to her childhood. Do you think her parents' abuse played a role, or was it something like psychopathy?
It's complicated. I mean, look at the Menendez brothers. Their upbringing was horrific, and it absolutely contributed to their choices, but their situation was about survival. Virginia's case feels different. Sure, she had an abusive childhood, but her actions weren't about escaping abuse. They were calculated, manipulative, and fueled by greed. That points to something beyond just trauma.
Exactly. If it was just about trauma, she might have stopped with lying and stealing, but the way she planned the murders shows that she had no empathy. That points to something like psychopathy, and that's how Dr. David Holmes puts it.
This is someone who is very controlled, somewhat obsessive, but also is showing those cool callous traits which can emanate from autism, psychopathy, which pre-exist. They've been there all this lady's life. So, she could have done things in the past we don't know about. However, that cool, calm exterior is a product of her indifference to the humanity that she destroyed. Yes, it's complete indifference to human life and suffering, pointing towards herself quite a lot. She was fairly obsessively controlling the interview with the police, correcting them, trying to get detail right, which seemed to her to be more important than the fact that she'd been living with the corpses of her parents for 4 years. I think it's narcissistic. I think it's a very much a psychopathic trait. It's a trait that also shows OCD, obsession, where she wants to kind of control every aspect. But she's not emotionally involved. It's a complete absence of emotional involvement. This wasn't a killing in anger. She wasn't in hatred of her parents. She had nothing particularly against her parents. In fact, she quite liked them. But they just got in the way of her finances, the debts, they're just getting in her way, and they had to go. And that was it. That's as much motivation as she needed to kill her parents and, bury them in the house, basically, while she carried on living and carried on spending what was left of their money.
And yet people around her knew she was strange, even odd. Isn't that where intervention should have come in? If someone had noticed the warning signs, her lying, her gambling addiction, even the fake pregnancy, maybe things wouldn't have spiraled like this.
But that's hindsight, isn't it? People often dismiss odd behavior unless it crosses a line. And let's be honest, Virginia's weirdness didn't exactly scream dangerous. She wasn't violent or aggressive, at least not outwardly. So why would anyone think she needed help?
True, but it also says something about how we handle mental health in general. There's this stigma that keeps people from seeking or offering help until it's too late. If Virginia had gotten therapy, maybe this would have ended differently. Or maybe not. It's hard to say.
There is also the question of her parents' role in all this. The other daughters said that John and Lois were abusive, but none of them turned out like Virginia. It makes you wonder, were her parents really the root cause? Or was there something uniquely broken in Virginia?
I think it's a mix. Abuse might explain her need to lie or seek control, but not the decision to murder. That feels like a line only someone predisposed to violence or manipulation would cross. And let's not forget, the other daughters weren't in the picture for years. Maybe they saw enough growing up to leave, but Virginia stayed. Was that loyalty, or did she see them as easy targets?
And then there is the timeline. If John's doctor hadn't raised concerns, how long would she have kept this charade going? 4 years is already unthinkable, but with the pandemic giving her cover, it's terrifying to think she could have gone on indefinitely.
Yeah, that's the scariest part for me, the idea that she was so close to getting away with it. If the doctor hadn't stepped in, we might not even know this story today. It makes you wonder how many other Virginia McCullers are out there, keeping their crimes hidden.
It's a sobering thought. But I think this case also highlights how critical small actions like welfare checks can be. It's easy to overlook red flags or dismiss concerns, but here, one doctor's vigilance uncovered such a dark truth.
Thank you all for joining us today. We hope you liked the video, and we'll see you next time on The Decoder.